course, there are individuals that are still bigoted and prejudiced. That's always going to be the case. But as a country, as an institution, we are not racist.
Hello, this is Stephen Edginton for The Sun, and today I'm interviewing Calvin Robinson. Calvin Robinson is a campaigner and commentator. We're going to be talking all about the government's recent race report on race relations in Britain. Thank you so much, Calvin, for joining us.
An absolute pleasure, Steve. Thanks for the invitation.
So obviously the government's race report has just come out, caused a lot of controversy. They basically said that Britain is not institutionally racist, although there are, individual cases of racism and racism still exists. First question, do you think Britain is a racist country?
Wow, straight off the bat with the deep end there. No, not at all. Of course it's not. I think there are, of course, many elements of racism throughout the country, but they are on an individual basis. We have, of course, there are individuals that are still bigoted and prejudiced. That's always going to be the case. But as a country, as an institution, we are not racist. And I think that's what this report found. It found many racial disparities, but when it looks deeper into the problems, it found that they're not all down to race, actually. And there are many more societal issues at play. And the moment we pin everything on race, we kind of lose the battle because we can't help solve these problems if we're afraid of looking at them.
Have you personally experienced racism in the UK?
Oh gosh, yes, all the time. Probably more so over this past year or so. So since Black Lives Matter riots took off last summer, I've experienced a hell of a lot more racism than I have in the entirety of the rest of my adult life, to be honest with you, Steve. I think a lot of that is down to the hard left have kind of painted themselves as anti-racists. And in this ideology that they've built up, they kind of see themselves as the good guys, and they're so self-righteous that anyone who isn't one of them is therefore against them and fair game. So people like me who don't subscribe to this victimhood mentality, which I'm sure we'll get to, kind of get cast aside, and they hurl racial abuse at me all the time just for not sharing their worldview, just for not sharing their perspective. I think that's very worrying, because if we want racial equality, surely we want diversity of thought and opinion. We want people of all colors and all creeds to kind of have their own opinions and not be told what to think and how to talk. And that's what we're up against at the moment.
So you're experiencing racism from the left?
Yeah, mostly from the hard left. And I want to specify here that this isn't white on black racism. This is mostly black on black racism. I've had Bangladeshi people call me house recently. There are a lot of white people calling me names too, but it is a case of we need to reclaim the language here. Racism means discrimination or prejudice against someone based on their ethnicity. It does not mean a white on black power struggle. And that's another thing that they're trying to reframe our language in order to win the battle. And that's not appropriate. It's not okay, because it undermines real racism does occur in this country. The fact that they see everything as racism kind of devalues the word. And it's an important word because it affects people's lives.
Well, this is the thing, and I'm interested to know where you think the distinction lies, because many, on the left who've criticized this report have said that they've experienced racism personally. It's been what they call their lived experience. And they would say, well, look, this is evidence of institutionalized racism. This is evidence that Britain is a racist country. I've had to live it almost every day of my life, had to go through endless discrimination. And you've just said there, you've experienced a lot of discrimination because of your race. So how could you possibly come to the conclusion that we're not institutionally racist as a nation?
First of all, let's remove that horrible tautology of lived experiences, because I don't know any other kind of experience. Let's not use that. But I'm not undermining anyone's experience. Like I said, I've experienced racism myself. As a child, it was even worse. We had fireworks lit through our letterbox, and we had people come on our back garden to steal our washing off the line, and people spit at us in the street and call us really, really horrible names walking down the street. I know what racism is. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, and neither is this report. What this report shows is that we as a country are not racist in an institutional manner. Meaning, so I work in education, for example, and people say to me all the time, education is racist, it's institutionally racist. And this report helps me highlight the fact that it's not, because Black African kids are excelling throughout school, primary, secondary, into higher education. They're twice as likely than white people to get into higher ed, into university. And Black Caribbean people are at the bottom of the league table, along with white British peoples, which shows me that either people don't understand what racism means, or if it is institutionally racist, it's racist against one particular type of Black person. I don't know many racists that would differentiate between a Black Caribbean person and a Black African person. So that kind of debunks their whole argument about institutional racism in education. But it's the same across the board. Whenever we look at racial disparities, we just assume it's racist. So, for example, one they keep using in the headlines this week is that midwifery. So pregnant women, if they're Black, they have more issues than white pregnant women during childbirth. They're more likely to die during childbirth, and all of these issues, which are very, very terrible issues that certainly need looking at. But to assume, just because there's a racial disparity there, that there is some kind of racism going on in the NHS is naive, because let's not forget that a majority of midwives in most hospitals are Black. And I don't think anyone who goes into the care profession would be thinking, "Ooh, let me treat Black pregnant women different to white pregnant women." And a disparity just highlights a wider issue. And if we stick with health, in cancer care, Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi patients have much better success with cancer treatment than white patients. Now, I wouldn't sit here and say, oh, the NHS is treating white cancer patients differently to Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi patients. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't pass the common sense test. And that's what we're missing here a lot of the time. People just see these disparities and assume racism. Well, what we need to do with all of these issues in our society is look deeper. And I think that's what this report does. It looks at the location, the geography, where you happen to live. That affects your life chances, your wealth, your class in particular. In this country, your class is a big factor. Other health issues, certain demographics are more susceptible to diabetes and all these kinds of things. Cultural, religious factors are at play, but most importantly, family structures are essential to our way of life. Throughout the pandemic, people have said, well, COVID-19 is racist, or it disproportionately affects ethnic minorities, and they just assume that's racist again. But what we have to do is look deeper, and if we do look deeper, we find that actually many ethnic minority families tend to live in multi-generational households, which is something that is no longer the case so much in white British families. And that, of course, that's going to affect the spread of a virus. That's how viruses work. So just to assume everything is racist is unhelpful and actually detrimental to the cause. And what we want to do is make the society better for everyone. And the way you do that, similarly, is exactly the same way we do it in education. We raise standards for everyone, raise expectations for everyone. We don't cherry pick on different communities and different ethnic minorities. We want the best for all people if we want equal opportunities, meritocracy, meritocracy. And that's what I think we want in this country.
There's a lot to unpick there. And I think, let's start on this kind of instinct to blame a kind of disparity or sort of a problem or, that's affecting one group or another, instantly to blame that on racism. Is there something more cynical at play here? What's the reason that their first instinct is to say, look, there's a problem here, it must be racist?
So there's a few things there, Steve. I think firstly, we have a whole cohort of race hustlers, people that commercially benefit from the UK being perceived as a racist country. They've got books to sell, they've got unconscious bias training to sell. It's quite a lucrative industry. But on the other end of the spectrum, if I'm being more charitable, what we have is a victimhood mentality. And again, this isn't people's faults, but a lot of people in this country are taught that they are going to be held back because of the color of their skin. They're taught that if they're brown or Black or whatever, that they're going to have a harder time in our society because this society is institutionally racist. And that is self-perpetuating. If you tell someone enough times that they're going to be held back, they're going to start to believe it. And either they're not going to work as hard as they could have done, or if they don't achieve success, they're going to pin that on what they've been told is institutional racism. And I don't think that is the case here. I think we have equal opportunities. We are almost at a meritocracy in this country. We need to keep working on it, absolutely. But there are things we can do. But the problem is breaking free of that victimhood mentality and actually twisting it around. And we need to tell young people that, if you work hard, you can become whatever you want to become in this country. You can make a success of your life by studying. And that's what we need to be telling young people, not that they've got so many barriers to overcome and hurdles to overcome.
Why do you think this report has caused so much anger, especially on the left? And I've seen, various commentators and people working for different charities and professors and people like that who've been all over the press in the last few days saying this is insane. How could you not say Britain, is not institutionally racist? You're denying, I'm going to use that term again, people's lived experiences, whatever that means. Why do you think it's caused so much anger?
Because people have this perception, and there is a very vocal minority in this country that have this perception that we are a racist country. And this report has removed the rhetoric. It's not partisan in that way. It's evidence-based. They've taken research and looked at the deep core of these issues and presented that. And people are upset because it's not aligning with their worldview. But as Shapiro would say, facts don't care about your opinions. This is the data. This is the evidence that we're going to use. But the problem is, it has, like I said, it has highlighted racial disparities. It's highlighted a lot of things that we need to work on. And this report has advice on how to tackle those issues. So rather than people sitting there saying, well, it hasn't said we have institutional racism, what they should do is look at the issues that have been raised and how we can address them and work together to solve these problems and to create a better society. They need to get off their high horse and stop playing party politics, because this is important stuff.
Now, you mentioned earlier the kind of people being taught that they live in a country which is going to discriminate against them, particularly if they're an ethnic minority. And that's a big part of the discussion at the moment. What do you think the impact of that is when you tell people, especially young people, at school or anywhere else, that you are growing up in a society that discriminates against you, where your white neighbors are secretly racist against you, that you're going to be held back? What impact does that have on people?
It's so upsetting because it builds resentment all around. And I've seen this firsthand, young Black kids who are being taught through critical race theory, through this prism of racism, that everyone is racist, and white people are naturally oppressors and Black people are naturally oppressed or victims. And we're teaching young people this, and young Black people will think, well, actually, I wasn't aware that white people are out to get me and they're all racist. And young white kids are thinking, well, I didn't know I was racist. This is really upsetting. What am I going to do about it? And it's causing division, and it's stoking up racial tensions where sometimes they didn't exist to begin with. And it's very, very harmful. And it's coming from a misguided attempt at goodwill. It is, a lot of these educators, a lot of people I know, teachers are the hardest working people I know, but a lot of them really think they're going to make a difference by helping the poor ethnic people. There's this whole, specifically, white upper middle class mentality. I call them the metropolitan liberal elites. They want to do good and they want to be seen to be doing good, but it's very patronizing, in that they don't see ethnic minorities the way they see themselves. They see them as people that need to be helped, and I don't think that's the case. Like I say, we need to raise expectations for everyone. In fact, this report highlights an idea that we spend far too much time looking at the low performance factors and the school league tables. So we know an awful lot, and it's important too, but we know an awful lot about kids that aren't doing too well. But we don't spend much time looking at kids that are doing really, really well. So what we need to do is look at the high performing kids and what's going on there. So for example, Chinese kids and Indian kids perform really high in school. So we need to look at that and say, well, what's happening there? Why are they performing so well? And how can we mirror that? How can we take that best practice, model it so that every other group is also performing as well as these groups? And I don't think it's down to racism. I think it's probably, like I said earlier, family structures or family values will come into play. We can certainly link that to the way that the Chinese kids are taught in schools and how they consider education at home. And that's an issue that we have in the UK in general, which is why white British kids and Black Caribbean kids aren't performing so well, because Black Caribbean people integrated very well into the society, and the issues that we see with white working class boys, we often see with Black Caribbean boys too. And what we're seeing with them is that at home, there isn't the same level of respect for education that there once was, especially in working class communities. Parents that haven't seen a benefit from education themselves aren't passing on that thirst for knowledge that we used to have. We used to have in this country a real thirst for social mobility. Back in the days of Margaret Thatcher, everyone wanted to better themselves and move onwards and upwards, and we've lost that. So people that aren't doing so well in life themselves are no longer pushing their kids to do better. They're actually just happy being or maybe not happy, but they are encouraging their children to follow their own path rather than trying to encourage them to do better than what they've done. And I think we need to put a new emphasis on social mobility. And schooling is, education should be working alongside what's happening at home. The school isn't supposed to replace the parent. It's a parent's job to educate the child. We are supplemental. The state should never take over from a parent, but that's what's happening. And it's very much an us versus them attitude at the moment in education, that we teach kids all day that school is important. Education is their way out and a way for them to improve themselves, better themselves, and get the best start in life. And they go home and the parents often don't care and don't support them, or sometimes can't support them. And that's sometimes where we need to step in. But we need to readjust and get back to, emphasizing the importance of education for everybody.
So perhaps Britain's not quite a racist country, but we are one that lacks aspiration, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why newer immigrant families, like, for example, Black African families tend to be newer immigrants to the UK than Black Caribbean families. That's why they're doing better than families that have been here for a longer time, because they still have that aspirational mentality. They've still got those strong family values that really encourage their kids to work hard and to become something.
So what should we be teaching young people, who are struggling, whether they're white or black? What is it that we should be telling them instead of, you're growing up in this terribly awful racist society? What should be the other message?
I think we need to tell them that this is the best place in the world to live. We're very lucky to be British, and that is the thing that unites all of us, regardless of our skin color, our religion, whatever. We are all part of this community. We need to work together. Individualism is important, as in don't let people label you and stick you in a box in order to control you. But at the same time, we're not only individuals. We are part of a society, and we have a sense of duty and service to that community that we belong to help make sure that this country is as good as it can be or better. And we all have a part to play in that. And that starts in school, from teaching young people to hold doors open for adults, or to give a seat up on the tube, or and it's just basic common sense that we've forgotten somewhere along the way, and it's become almost taboo to discuss these things. But this whole cultural capital, learning the words to the Lord's Prayer and God Save the Queen, and all of these things, I'd be classed as like far right for even saying this at this point. That's how far the Overton window has shifted to the left. But we need to teach more conservative values as well. Growing up, I've talked about this story a few times now, but my mother was a single parent, and she always worked, at least 2 jobs to put bread on the table. She's a lecturer. I'm very proud of my mum. She's a very successful person, but she had to work really hard in order to support me and my sister. And all around us were people that weren't working and were much better off than my mother. And that always taught me, that there's something wrong with our system, because we live in a welfare state. And to me, the welfare state should be a safety net. It should be a backup option for if someone's struggling, down and out, and they've got no option. That should be where you turn to the state. But at the moment, it's pinning people down, because people are becoming dependent on the state, because they're better off doing nothing, staying at home on these benefits, than they are going out and trying to do something with their lives. And people want meaning. People want to provide for their family. They want to feel like they're contributing to society. People don't want to be stuck at home. We need to get away from that mentality, and to do that, we need to embrace conservative values.
I'm interested in this kind of concept you mentioned earlier about maybe white saviors. I know that this is something those on the left like to talk about in terms of people going over to Africa and sort of making this poverty, making films about poverty and things like that. But you've sort of turned that around in a way and said, well, a lot of people in the UK are well-meaning, but these are the people that are saying that we live in a terribly racist society, and they view ethnic minorities perhaps as kind of people to be saved. Do you think that there's this sort of tendency, especially among these perhaps white, more middle class, younger people, to want to be a new civil rights, leader, or sort of want to be the new MLK, or want to be this kind of fighter for good in the world? And what impact is that having on our society and the kind of divisions that we have within our society?
Yeah, these white saviors crack me up, because quite often on social media, I get a very middle class white person telling me I'm wrong about my own lived experiences, because I don't parrot the critical race theory perception of racism. I must be wrong. And I just love that idea that someone who believes that racism is white people oppressing black people and black voices need to be heard, shutting down a black voice because it doesn't agree with them. They don't see the irony of their ways there. It always makes me laugh. But so they're the misguided ones. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the control freaks. We've got, you know, what happened with Jeremy Corbyn saying that the Labour Party are going to unlock our potential as ethnic minorities, or what happened with Biden in America saying that if you don't vote Democrats, you ain't black. There's this idea that ethnic minorities somehow belong to the left. And I think that's a control mechanism. I think that's, you know, the left rely on our votes. And that's why they want us all to think alike and talk alike and vote alike. And the moment we stand up for ourselves as individuals and stand up for freedom of expression and thought of opinion and actual true diversity, they get upset about it because it's going to ruin their power structure, really. The Labour Party in this country would not manage to get elected. Well, I haven't recently for a long time, to be honest, but they won't win seats without the ethnic minority vote. We all know that. And again, that's another taboo topic. But this is because they keep peddling the myth that they are the party that supports ethnic minorities, when it's not, because they look at us as a homogenous group that they can mold and control and or liberate and patronize. Whereas the right tend to see us as individuals with different thoughts and opinions who we can disagree with and we can debate with. And this always comes down to that problem, doesn't it? That the right see people on the left as wrong, but the left see people on the right as evil or bad. And it's the same when it comes to race. If I don't, as an ethnic minority person myself, if I don't say what I'm supposed to say as an ethnic minority, I'm bad or evil. And therefore, again, fair game for abuse and open to all kinds of hostility because they can't control me and people like me.
So you don't receive any kind of agency from the left because of your skin color? I mean, that's what I would just instinctively assume, because they love to talk about people's lived experiences. You haven't had that same privilege as to be supported in that way.
Interesting, isn't it? That they do love to talk about lived experiences and raising black voices. But why is it that only certain lived experiences count? Why does my lived experience not count? Why does that not matter? Because it's not the same as theirs. Surely if all the lived experiences are the same, they're not really lived experiences, are they? They're not personal experiences anyway. It's more a narrative. It's more a story that they're trying to peddle than actual people's personal lived experiences. And my experience of racism, I've had lots of racism as a child, as I've expressed. I've experienced a lot of racism as an adult recently, again, from the left. But none of this matters to them because I'm not one of them. I'm not in their group. And it's very much us versus them. You're either with them or against them. And that's why they're so clever, Steve, using this label anti-racist, because who wants to stand up and say they're against the anti-racists? Because it's going to make you look like a racist by default. And this is why I do what I do, because I mean, as a brown person, I can almost get away with saying I am against the anti-racists, probably much more than you could, which is, again, another problem, that we're not able to have these conversations in this country. For a white person to address race, you're almost automatically shut down as a racist, which is why it really is, which is again why I'm going to keep having this battle and keep having this fight until we can all stand up as individuals, free to express our thoughts and opinions.
What's your opinion on sort of how do we remove the toxicity from this debate? How do we get less divisive here?
You're right, it is very divisive, and I think that is on purpose, because it is these neo-Marxists that want to break down our way of life. Most of the time, all of these groups, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, they're all anti-capitalist more than they are anti-racist or anti-fascist. And that's the problem there. They want to break down our way of life. They're against family values, they're against the police, they're against all of these standards that we've come to expect in a normal Western society. And they want to rebuild it in their own utopian image, which we know is a nonsense that would never work. But the way to get around this polarization is to actually look at what brings us together. And we have so much more in common than we have that divides us. And we need to keep re-emphasizing that and focusing on that. And I always come back to our Britishness, because it is the core thing that unites all of us, no matter where we're from, and no matter what our family backgrounds and our race and religion. We can all get behind the flag, or we can all get behind the sovereign, Her Majesty the Queen. And as we're all subjects of Her Majesty the Queen. And again, that's another thing that unites us. We need to kind of promote British values more. And that's another thing that we could do in education, because at the moment in education, we have the teacher standards that all teachers must abide by. And they say, you must not undermine British values. And that's very passive. I think we need to flip that into the active of we must promote British values at all times.
Yeah, this idea of Britain and the Queen, and I think there's a lot to get in there to talk about. I mean, one of the issues recently that's come up is Meghan Markle in the United States. She basically accused a member or members of the royal family of being racist, and this caused a huge outcry in America, in Britain, And it's funny, there's a huge generational divide on this issue. And you know, the reason this is important to talk about is because it is relevant to our country. The monarchy is a huge part of our constitution. And when you've got a member of said monarchy accusing it of being racist, or at least partly racist, then it's important, you know, that's basically saying part of the UK and part of Britain is racist, a major part of that. And if you look at opinion polls, most young people tend to agree with Meghan Markle, and most older people tend to hugely disagree with her. Do you think there's a huge generational divide around these issues? And if so, why?
I do, and I'll get to that, but I just want to address this Meghan Markle issue because I think it was absolutely abhorrent what she did. She implied racism. She didn't actually explicitly say there was racism going on. She dropped a bombshell, and she was very ambiguous about it and left it and walked away. I think that's a disgusting game to play. She's essentially tearing down a British institution in order to prop herself up, and that's what she's done. She's launching her US career again. And she was a C-list actress that married a prince, and now she's gone back over there with him as her sidekick to try and make herself more of an A-lister. And I think it's disgusting that she's using our country and our institutions to do that. If there is racism going on in the palace, then she needs to address it properly. Airing her family's dirty laundry on international television was a disgrace. And I'm saddened that Oprah didn't have the journalistic integrity to really push on these issues further and question them. But also the conversation that it was brought up around, I wrote in The Sun about this actually, that of course, we're going to have conversations about the color of a newborn child. In Black and ethnic minority families, that happens all the time. I'm a mixed race person myself. A white mother, Black father. I'm pretty sure they would have had a conversation about what my skin tone would be like, just as they did my eye color and my hair color. That's not racist. The first ethnic minority royal, possibly. Of course, that's going to be a topic of conversation. And just looking at it through a critical race theory lens of someone using the word race or addressing race must be racist is another nonsense. And she's caused a lot of trouble over that. But you're right, it is an age divide there again. And it comes down to essentially what we call the long march through the institutions, doesn't it? The hard left, the neo-Marxists have taken over education. They started in academia. They've taken over tertiary education as well. We know, the statistics back this up, that 80 to 90% of academics and teachers vote for left-leaning parties. They voted Remain. There's a massive groupthink there, massive groupthink mentality in this echo chamber that everyone kind of has the same worldview, and that's dangerous because they're passing this on to our young people. And I've seen this all the time, this indoctrination by the left on our young people. And I don't know if they're always doing it on purpose, but they are certainly doing it. And they're talking about Boris Johnson and the Conservatives as evil. And we saw the same with Donald Trump, Brexiteers as ignorant, xenophobes. And these are taken as given because so many of them think alike. They don't even question that there might be a different perspective. And I've seen this in schools, I've seen this in universities, and it's a real problem. But we're getting to a point now where it's even more of an issue because they're shutting down opposing views. No platforming started with the NUS, the National Union Student Union, who should be promoting debate and challenge and open conversations. And now if someone's invited to a university from the centre right, they're shut down and cancelled. And it started on the far right, and people are like, yeah, well, we get it because Katie Hopkins is a bit, out there, and then Milo Yiannopoulos, and then it came a bit further right, a bit further in. Oh, yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's Catholic, those religious people, and then even further. And now we've got to the point where Amber Rudd, who I consider a pretty centre right, or maybe even centrist on most things, can't even speak at Oxford University, the best university in the world. What is happening in that our students are so afraid of different voices and different opinions, and diversity is such a risk to them now because they don't believe in tolerance unless it's tolerance of their own thoughts and opinions. We need to get back to true diversity of thought and opinion. Otherwise, I'm very, very worried of what's happening. But you're right, it is an age divide, and the way we fix that is by, supporting free speech at all costs, promoting free speech, enabling students to speak up if they're in a vocal minority, enabling them to take legal action on their universities if they shut them down or if they shut down other people for speaking openly, challenging student unions that only want to present one view in a debate. I don't know how you can hold a debate with only one view, but you know what I'm getting at. And I think the idea of having a free speech champion on every campus to do that would be great. And I think the idea of a free speech czar in the government would be fantastic. We've heard rumors about that. I hope that comes to fruition. That'd be great to see. But yeah, so the way to challenge this tyranny of perspectives is through freedom of speech.
Do you think there is a culture of fear, talking about these issues, not only race, but, other controversial topics, not just in universities, but just in general conversations, and we've talked a bit about some of the accusations you get if you don't have the right skin color when talking about race issues. Is there a culture of fear, and how do we remove that if there is?
Yeah, there is, and we just have to be brave. I still get afraid of addressing Islamism on social media. I still get afraid of addressing the trans issue on social media because people come for you, and they're quite rabid, these activists. They will really, really hound you down. I've had people calling around my workplaces and trying to dox me and all kinds of things going on. And it does shut you down. It does make you not want to talk, but that's not helpful. We need to just stand up and own it and stick our heads above the parapets. And if we get a few heads chopped off, we have to live with it and keep standing up and keep rising up again. And the thing is, we are the majority in this country. The normal people with common sense and British values, and dare I say it, Christian values, are in the majority. And if we all stand up, they can't cancel all of us. And this is what I keep saying at the moment. People on social media on our side of the argument, put your avatar up there. Get rid of your silly anonymous thing. Put your face there. Put your name up on your social media. Own your opinions and stand up together, because we're much stronger together. And there are more of us than there are them. They are a vocal minority. They want to tear down our way of life. They want to tear down our statues, rename our streets. They want to silence us. We can't let them.
This issue of Britain, and we've talked about British values, the monarchy, and this report, is all about Britain as a country. And one of the things the report says is that the UK is a beacon for other majority white nations in terms of race relations. And we've come so far in the last few decades for all groups of ethnic minorities and for white people as well. What do you make of this argument that Britain is a good example of a country where multiculturalism, where ethnic minorities mix well together, and Britain is a sort of beacon of hope in that sense? Do you think that's true? And have you been to other countries and seen, experienced kind of different cultures and different ways of dealing with this issue?
Yeah, we've certainly made a lot of progress. When my grandfather came over during the Windrush generation, racism was bad, and it was less so for my father and less so for me. But like I said, I've experienced it still. It's still going on. We need to work on it, but we've made a lot of progress, and we need to celebrate that, because there's so much focus on the negativity all the time. And I have traveled, indeed. I've had really, really challenging experiences on the continent. In particular, Spain is a country that I'm not too keen on going back to anytime soon. Basque separatists out there were very, very hostile to a person of ethnic minority status. And there are, other places around the world where I wouldn't want to travel to, because they're not as liberal and tolerant as we are in the UK.
And one of the recommendations from this report was to scrap the use of the word BAME. And this is a word that basically encompasses everyone who isn't white. What do you think of that recommendation specifically?
I think that's good, because the word BAME kind of benchmarks people against white people. It's like you're either white or you're not white. And I think that's a very dangerous way to look at society, because, first of all, people are individuals. But if we need to look at people based on ethnicity, there are so many ethnicities there. Grouping them all up as one homogenous group and calling it BAME doesn't make sense. Just as much as, people keep referring to the Black community, and I don't understand what the Black community is either, because I know a lot of Black Caribbean people. I know a lot of Black African people, and to be honest, there are very few similarities between them. I'd probably see more similarities between white British people and Black Caribbean people than Black Caribbean people and Black African people. So it doesn't make any sense to group people together in this way, other than to put people against each other, and to pit white people against ethnic minority people is ridiculous. And so therefore the term is unhelpful. It doesn't help this issue, which is fixing racial disparities.
Let's talk about our history, our culture as a nation. You said, earlier, Britain, we should be proud of Britain, proud of our heritage. Many people would say, well, look, we've got this awful history steeped in racism because of slavery and the slave trade. And we were obviously major players in that for a long time. Do you think we should be ashamed of our past generally?
Our past, our personal past, sure. Yeah, absolutely. If we've done something wrong, we should be ashamed of it. We should not be ashamed of the actions of other people that we had no influence over, that took place years before we were born. That's ridiculous. I would not be any more ashamed of that than I would be proud of it. If people choose to, that's up to them. But if you want to look at history, you have to look at history holistically. And yes, this country has committed atrocities in the past, but so has every single country if you dig back far enough. But what we need to do is look at balance again and look at, yes, there were things that we did wrong when we were known as the British Empire, but there was also a lot of good that we did. You know, we spread parliamentary democracy across the world. I'm sure most people would universally agree that that's a great thing. We spread charities and hospitals and education and railways. There were a lot of things that the British Empire was successful at and did really well. But that doesn't, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't atrocities as well. It's all about balance. And the same with slavery. And everyone always brings up slavery again as if it's a black versus white issue. Many, many, many black people had slaves. Many, many, many Arabs had slaves. Slavery is a worldwide issue. It's still an issue that's going on today. And people are obsessed with slavery that ended 400 years ago, but they're not doing much about modern day slavery that's still going on across the world. And that brings shame on those people. But also, if we're going to talk about Britain's part in the slave trade, in the transatlantic slave trade, then we need to also consider that the British were the ones that abolished it on a global scale. The Royal Navy was instrumental in abolishing slavery. The Slavery Abolition Act cost this country trillions, the most we've ever paid for anything in the history of this country, in order to end slavery on a global scale. So if people want to talk about how bad this country's been in our past, they also need to talk about the good things we've done too.
One of the other interesting debates that's gone on recently has been about not just British identity, but also English identity. And there's been, you know, we're currently going through the national census, where one of the questions is, how do you identify? And you could sort of tick a series of boxes of, you know, English, Welsh, British, whatever. How do you identify, out of curiosity?
I'm English.
And what do you make of this debate around being English and people saying, well, no, you shouldn't, because a lot of people say, well, English identity is a kind of a nationalistic thing. It's not something to be proud of. There was this big debate with David Lammy and this caller on LBC saying you can't be black and English at the same time. What do you make of this debate around English identity?
It's a really interesting one for me, because this is one where I separate from the right. So especially people further right than me would say, no, you're not English. So absolutely I am. I'm English and I am British. British is my nationality on my passport, but I'm also English in that I was born in England. Both my parents were born in England. I have English culture, English language, English tradition, English ancestry. So if anyone's going to question my English status, I would say, what are you basing that on? And it always comes down to skin color. And I would suggest that anyone that says I'm not English because of the color of my skin is racist. Because ethnicity isn't about skin color. And people say, well, it's about race, but race is a social construct. I'd love to see someone prove to me that there are different races other than the human race. I think, in fact, if we focused more on our unity as a human race, we would be in a better place than we are. This trying to divide people up based on their skin color and assigning races to those skin colors is unhelpful. But yeah, so I have mixed ethnicity. I am mixed race. I'm half black, half white. That's my skin color. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I'm still English. I'm not ashamed of that. I would say I'm proud to be English, because I think this is the greatest country in the world, and I choose to live here. I could live anywhere, but I choose to live here, and that's not something that we should be ashamed of. And that's where we battle with the left, in that, you know, patriotism is seen as a bad thing. But again, our nation is what brings us together. It's the thing that unites us. As long as we're not going over the top and saying we're better. We're not talking down other nations, but we should be allowed to support our own nation and support our fellow patriots and our fellow subjects of the crown, and kind of look at our similarities more than our differences, I think.
And finally, I want to ask one more question, and this is sort of about the general direction of where we're heading as a country, as a society. Do you think we're going in a positive direction? You know, seeing the debate around this race report, and seeing the anger and the hatred, and there's so much division in our society over these issues, especially in the last few years. You know, we talked about the culture wars a lot in this interview. So do you think, you know, bearing that in mind, but also bearing in mind the fact that in many ways, race relations have improved massively in the last few decades. Where do you think we're going as a nation? Good or bad? That's not very nuanced, but you can take it as it is.
No, it's not, is it? I think we were doing really well. We were making a lot of progress, and the incident surrounding the death of George Floyd was, it was terrible. It was in another country. It's a foreign instance. And we've kind of adopted the drama of it, and it has sent us backwards in a lot of ways. Like I say, since that incident, I've experienced more racism than I have in the entirety of my adult life. And that's a problem, because many other people will have experienced it too. And we've become much more polarized. Everything is an us versus them. Like you said, it's not good enough to not be racist now. You have to be an anti-racist or you're a racist. It's nonsense. We need to get back to good old-fashioned common sense that everyone is just a person, an individual. Let's talk to people on a human level. Use their name rather than their color, and kind of. Yes, so we are heading in the reverse direction, but it's not too late. In these culture wars, we can still win. And when I say we, I mean everyone. The only way to win the culture wars is when we come back together as one British people and stop trying to. It's not a right versus left issue. It's not a trans versus transphobic issue. It's not a racist versus anti-racist issue. It's a people issue. It's a human issue. It's a British issue. We have to find unity. Otherwise, we will remain divided, and it's toxic. We need to come away from it.
On that unifying note, thank you very much for joining us.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.